I will jump in. This is Louise Robinson, one member of the Haiti Committee. And Beth, I also just want to do a reminder to turn your audio on so that when the video, yes, great, thank you. So,
I hope.
So, well, first, thanks to the Adult Forum for giving us this time both today and next Sunday. Our focus for both days is going to be on stories about our experiences getting to know and becoming friends with our partners in Bonne Nouvelle, and all of that within a bit of context of Haitian history. So today, Ruth Ann Olson is going to start. She'll share a bit of the history of Haiti and of our partnership. And then Liz Aythorn and I will follow up with a few stories from our travels to Haiti, to Bonne Nouvelle specifically. And then we'll open it up for some questions and comments. So without further explanation, I'll hand the mic over to Ruth Ann Olson.
Ruth Ann, you are unmuted.
Ruth Ann, are you muted?
All right, okay. All right, thank you, Louise. You'll see on your screen, Honneur Respect. That is a traditional Haitian greeting that when you approach a home in Haiti and if there's no one outside, you call out honneur, which means honor in English. And the person inside responds respect or respect, and that is the greeting now that you can enter their home. So we named our partnership that in 2008. Next slide, please. I'll pause and say thank you to Beth for putting this together, and we'll just let people know in advance there is one slide that has 2 typographical errors, and they are entirely my fault, not Beth's. So we'll start with the map, and you see, just to get a sense of where we are with Haiti, in the upper left is Florida. Cuba is right below that, and the country that we call Haiti in the arrow in the center. Next slide. To focus a bit more, you see Haiti here. The arrow points to the mountain village of Bigonnet, where our partnership is. For those of you who have been long time involved in St. Luke's partnership work in Haiti, actually, if you go straight north about an inch on the coast there, near Anse-Galais is where Montouilly is, where St. Luke's was involved for many years in doing school lunches. And those of you familiar with St. Luke's work in more recent years, the Plant with Purpose program has worked all pretty much throughout the whole border with the on the east. Next slide. So to focus on our partnership, in 2008, our Haiti committee at the time, which of course was only St. James, but now is fully integrated with membership of the former St. Luke's and the former St. James. We have 4 or 5 partnership goals: to educate ourselves about Haiti, to build relationships with Haiti, to partner with Bonne Nouvelle Church and School, and build community with other Minnesota churches participating in Haiti, and to see where the Spirit leads us. And I'm going to focus a little bit here in this first 4 or 5 minutes on the first one, which is educating ourselves about Haiti. And the next slide, please. This will build directly on Father William's sermon about the manifest destiny, etc. So it's a kind of grim story. You see the artist rendition an artist rendition on the left of the Taino Indians, indigenous people who occupied Haiti for centuries and centuries. Estimates were around 3 to 5 million people, indigenous Taino Indian people, who were on that island, which now occupies both Haiti and Dominican Republic, but that full island. They lived there on December 5th, 1492, a year that's certainly familiar to all of us. Christopher Columbus shipwrecked on the shores of the island and enslaved the Taino people to mine gold and the other rich sources of the island. Totally in keeping with the manifest destiny that William was naming in his sermon, Essentially, Spain landed there, shipwrecked, didn't even land, just wrecked, laid claim to the island and all of its resources, including its people. Within 50 years, they had totally annihilated the 3 to 5 million indigenous people who lived there. I find that to be a stunning statement, and quite frankly, I've checked it in several sources, and I see nothing that conflicts with that. When you think about it, if you take that middle figure and say there are 4 million people there, 50 years, 365 days a year, simple arithmetic shows that during the Spanish rule of that island, they killed more than 200 indigenous people every single day on average over 50 years. Next slide, please. Once Spain had annihilated the source of free labor, they quickly lost interest and chose to abandon the western portion of the land, of the island, which we now call Haiti, to France. This was the richest of all France's colonies. Haiti offered products much coveted by the Western world, especially indigo, mahogany, sugar. And since the Taino people were no longer available as a source of labor, to harvest these labor-intensive resources, France entered the cross-Atlantic slave trade, developing an extraordinarily cruel system of human trafficking, far exceeds anything else in the rest of the world. Records show, for example, that an estimated 700,000 people were shipped from Haiti to, from Western Africa to Haiti, and they could be expected to live little more than 7 years before they died of exhaustion, starvation, or direct violence inflicted by French plantation owners. So a lifespan of 7 years under the rule of the French. And I have to say, these grim stories of Taino Indians and Indian slaves have always been important, but they are even more so in 2020, when the world is literally demanding that we face the legacy of violence and racism among our European Christian ancestors. So the next slide, please. In 1798, Haiti's slaves rose up in a rebellion. And one footnote of history is that Napoleon's need for money to fight the slave rebellion in Haiti fueled his sale of the Louisiana Purchase to the United States President Thomas Jefferson. And this is the expansion of our country, encompassing, we call it the Louisiana Purchase, but obviously that green area, much more than Louisiana, a portion of Minnesota. Portions are all of 15 states and a small portion of 2 Canadian provinces. Napoleon lost the rebellion, the slaves won, and in 1804, Haiti became the world's first independent Black republic. Next slide, please. This is a wonderful statue. I won't take time to go into all of its symbolism. We'll have some resources that we'll make available at next week's forum. But this is the dominant symbol of Haitian independence that's in the capital city. Next slide, please. So many years of internal and international power struggles have followed. The ins and outs are just endless, and I'm not even going to begin to approach trying to describe them today. But I want to move quickly to how it led to our partnership beginning in 2008. And if we were meeting in person, at this point, we'd give you a handout. Since we're not in person, but in individual living rooms, we can't do that. So what we're going to do is to make a note of who from Saints Luke and James, I mean, whoever's on the screen for this forum, and we'll email to you next week this set of documents. So just very quickly, I'm going to walk through and urge you to read these when you get your handout out electronically next week. The first year in 2008, and I should say we began to put this little set together in 2010. So it's an ongoing history that we keep adding to. 2008, Louise Robinson and I first visited Bigonnais after I had gone the year before with Barb Buell to Haiti. And I'll point out two pictures in that 2008 segment on the left half of your screen. The top photo in that little segment is a photo of the St. James people, which we took as a gesture of friendship when we went to Haiti. You'll see hanging above us there peace flags, which you're now familiar with. And then the picture below that is, and it's a bad picture to begin with, but even harder on this screen. But when you get that in the email next week, the string of peace flags that we took with us to Bon Nouvelle. So take a look at that. In the lower half of this page, year 2009, you'll see some photos of our joint activities there. I'll focus a minute on 2010, which was a devastating earthquake that killed more than 130,000 people in Haiti. I'll stop just so we can absorb that number. 130,000 people were killed with an earthquake that lasted less than 5 minutes. Nearly every building in Bigonnais was destroyed, actually the entire region, but the village itself suffered no loss of human life. And when you get your electronic handout, you'll be able to read some of the snippets of how the earthquake affected our partnership. I'll call attention to the photographs that's in the middle there of 2010 in the lower, right in the middle. It was essentially Louise, when we were there in 2010 after the earthquake, teaching Haitian children about snow. And you'll want to look at that picture particularly carefully. Next slide, please. In 2011, we were working together in our partnership. We were able to expand their elementary school from K6 to K8. It was strictly partnership cooperation that made that possible. Year 2012 saw our first St. James teen trip to Bigonnais. And Louise and Liz are going to talk more about that in a few minutes. 2013 was a particularly exciting year for our partnership because it was the first time that we were able to bring Haitian teachers and church leaders to Minnesota. It was also the year when we began to expand our partnership in Minnesota to go far beyond St. James, to include Trinity Lutheran Church in Hovland, St. Mary's Episcopal Church in St. Paul, and Watton Middle School, and the Kenwood Retirement Community in Minneapolis. Lots more Minnesotans now learning from Haitians in many ways when they are here and in partnership. Year 2014, Bon Nouvelle and our partners in Minnesota were able to create a long-held dream for people in Bigonnais, which was to begin a vocational program along with their now K-8 school by establishing a sewing class. They had the commitment and the talent. We helped with money to pay teacher salary and to buy used treadle sewing machines. And we delivered suitcases full, literally suitcases full of supplies donated by former sewers across Minnesota, who were delighted, frankly, in many cases, to empty their closets of unused fabric, thread, zippers, bias tape, etc. Next slide. Year 2015 and 2016, you'll see even more travels. Bon Nouvelle to Minnesota, Minnesota to Bon Nouvelle, including yet another youth trip, and a joint partnership response to Hurricane Matthew, which destroyed the livelihoods of almost everybody in Bigonnais. Many more things happening in the school with people of St. James and with our work together. Year 2017 was then the distribution of seedlings that came from help that we were able to give with money that they raised seeds, grew new trees, distributed those. You'll hear more about that in the adult forum next week. And the last one here is 2018. I'm going to call attention particularly to the purple box in the lower left-hand corner, which says Bon Nouvelle's readiness to build a new church, to move from the tattered tarps and tin and plywood that they had been worshiping in since the earthquake in 2010, and beginning to building that. And the last year and a half has been a tremendous amount of partnership focus on building that church. So thanks to Beth for helping me through this, and I'll turn it back now to Louise.
Thanks, Ruth Ann. And thanks for setting up the context now for Liz and I to tell a few stories about our travels to Bigonnet. And next week we'll continue on talking about that, as well as hosting people from Bigonnet here. So I'm up next, and my story is going to be a story about cooking and about acknowledgement. So this is a story from a time that was still relatively early in our partnership. It occurred as friendships were beginning to take shape and gain depth. It was on one of our several visits to Bonne Nouvelle. And first I want to clarify that on our trips, we don't formally do anything. That is, we don't go to build schools or dig wells or address any other perceived needs. Next slide, please. What we go to do is to meet our partners, build friendships, and in doing so, strengthen the understanding and trust between the people and the parishes involved in the partnership. By doing this, we learn a lot about their needs, about how they are trying to address them, and what we might possibly do to help, which does often involve financial assistance because their economy is in such duress. But we have found over time that the finances are not what they consider most vital to the partnership. That might be obvious, but money has a funny way of throwing things off balance. And our Haitian friends constantly remind us that our friendship trumps all other forms of support. There are numerous examples of this, but let me try to convey at least one. Next slide. Each time we have visited Bonne Nouvelle, we have tried to get more involved in community life. Our hosts accommodate all of our needs, from elaborate spreads of food to offers to do our laundry, to splitting a coconut so we can enjoy the taste of its milk. But each visit, we've tried to break through that host-visitor barrier a bit more, usually trying to help with tasks at hand. Next slide. And little by little, they have acquiesced. They have involved us in various facets of their work: washing the dishes, gathering the water from the well, peeling vegetables, even cutting up a goat for a festival meal. On one trip, the women came to us and offered to teach us to make bean sauce. Now, this seemed like a really big breakthrough because bean sauce is a traditional dish and requires quite a bit of preparation. We were truly being invited to share in their work. Next slide. So we were led back to the cooking area, which is a small enclosed room. You do the preparation on the outside, but the fire and the big black pot are on the inside. Our hosts were already there, and one woman we hadn't met yet. I've never been certain, but I think she was someone that they had paid to come and help prepare the food for our visit. Next slide. Now, making this dish is quite a process. You take the beans and you cook them, and then you put them through a sieve, which takes a lot of elbow grease. Then you cook some more, and they go back through the sieve again, and cook more and through the sieve. And after several rounds, my arm was getting pretty darn tired and sore, and I was beginning to wonder just how many times these poor beans had to be forced through the sieve before they were ready to eat. Next slide. But finally, it seemed that they had been adequately mashed, and they were put in a big black pot over an open fire to simmer for quite a long time. And the woman we had just met seemed to have the task of watching and stirring them. Now, mind you, it's afternoon in Haiti, the hot part of the day in a hot country, cooking over a hot stove. And we've all just been working pretty hard, so we've worked up a sweat. And suddenly we were just watching our new friend as she checked the beans, stirred the beans, then would interact with us, then checked the beans and stirred the beans. And as this continued, I began to feel an awkwardness settle in. I had been intensely involved in helping to prepare the beans, but now I was just watching someone else do the continued work. And when I'm in a new or awkward situation, I prefer to stay active. So I got up and through sign language and a few words, I offered to help stir the beans. This new woman allowed me to take the big spoon from her hand and watched me get to work. As I stirred, my back was to her. When I was done, I turned around and I saw her looking at me straight on. Nothing overly dramatic, but a very focused gaze, eye to eye, taking me in. After a pause, she finally said very simply, "You acknowledge me." And I have to admit, I was rather taken aback because I was just stirring the beans. I was keeping myself busy in a situation where I still felt slightly awkward. Stirring the beans was no big deal, right? But instantly I realized that it was a big deal. I was putting myself in her place. I was acknowledging her role in the work that was getting done. I was acknowledging her. I was doing a lot more than simply stirring the beans. And in that moment, she taught me what was truly important in our partnership. It was the relationships we were developing, the fact we were getting to know each other. She reminded me of the value of a very basic human act, to acknowledge and be acknowledged. Now that lesson had a particular impact for me, given the specific role I had in the partnership, because as it happens over the years, I've been responsible for wiring tens of thousands of dollars to that village, most of which goes to help support the salaries of the teachers in the school. And on every trip we take to Bon Nouvelle, we take hundreds of dollars worth of goods down with us. Everything from soccer balls to sewing fabric to laptop computers. But the most important thing I did on that trip, probably over the 12 years of partnership, is to acknowledge her. And remembering that moment still blows me away. Next slide. So that's my story. And on the right, in the red, is my cooking partner, my teacher, and my friend, Madame Sona. Next slide. I think I wanted to share one more way in which our partnership and relationships have developed, which is to make mention of the teens and young adult members of the parish that have traveled to Haiti. We are running a little overtime. I think we might be best if we, I hand things over to Liz. We can maybe get back to this. It's only a 2-minute video, but we're probably at least 5 or more minutes overtime. I want to be sure to have questions at the end. So we can either have this at the end or next week, but it's a wonderful involvement of teens and young adults in our trips to Haiti. So maybe go ahead 2 slides. The next, this would be, oh, here. Liz, is this where you start?
Yes, this is where I start.
Okay, I'll let you take it away.
Okay. My first visit, or my only visit to Bigonnais, was the same visit that Louise just referred to. When we took a group of teens there, and there were several adults. It was a very large group. It was the largest group that they had welcomed there. And it was at a time when they were still recovering from the earthquake. But they said, come ahead. And so we did. At that time, we went in June of 2012. I was a middle school English teacher at that time. I guess probably a lot of you don't know that was my previous work. And I had to close down my classroom in 1 day, which is something I usually used to take a week or 2 to do. And so I was very exhausted and nervous getting on that plane to Haiti, but very excited, and it was a very exciting time. Next slide, please. One of the first persons I met in Haiti was Louis Nansin, the principal of Bonne Nouvelle School. And I was immediately, right away, taken by his warmth and his charisma. And even though we didn't share a language, somehow we were able to communicate with each other. We had things in common. We are both educators. I was a teacher, and of course he's a principal. We were both musicians. At the time, I was the youth choir director at St. James. And Louis loves to sing. I brought with me, in my rush, I thought one thing I could possibly do that could add to the partnership was make a recording of some of the music while I was there. So I brought this, I bought a little tiny tape recorder because of course there's no electricity in the village. And that was before cell phones and all kinds of easy ways to tape things. So I brought this little tiny tape recorder, and sitting in the compound outside the home of Cedar Nelson, who was is the lay leader of the village now and was then. And he also, Cedar is also a musician, and he writes a lot of songs that they sing in the church. Sitting outside the compound with Louis and Cedar, after the Sunday morning service, I told them I would really like to take some of the music back that I'd heard. And so Louis just started singing the songs for me, and I taped them. And Cedar wrote them out very carefully in his beautiful handwriting in Creole. And so I took back the tape recording and the Creole. Next slide, please. And I was able to make a transcription of these two songs. One was a popular song that they always sing at the peace called La Paix N'a Cherché. And the other was a song that was written by Cedar, the lay leader. So I was able to transcribe the music and write down the Creole, and I was able to kind of come up with a singable translation, kind of with some help from Google Translate. I shared them with David Lesniaski, who was the music director at St. James at that time. And then it was only 6 months later that Cedar and Louis and a couple of other people from the village came to St. James to visit. Next slide, please. And during that time when they were there, we brought out the songs, and they helped me teach the songs to the choir, and we sang them in the service on Sunday morning. And it was a very exciting time for the choir, our choir, and for them to be able to sing together something in Creole. Of course, they knew many of our hymns that we were singing in English. They sang familiar hymns to us down there as well. But it was just so nice to sing in Creole with them. I think it meant a lot to all of us. Next slide, please. During that time, Louis, it was early January, the first week in January, and we typically have an Epiphany pageant with our children that Louise puts together, and I help with the music. And so Louis was there, and he carried the star for our pageant. So we have that nice picture of him carrying the star. Next slide, please. Then 5 years later, there was a visit in between, but in their most recent visit, Louis and Cedar again were with us, and they stayed at our home as they had also on the two previous visits. But what was different this time was that Cliff and I at this point were music directors at the church. And so while they were staying with us, I said to Cedar, do you have another song that we could learn? Because we've sung those other two songs for 5 years now, and we're ready to learn something new. And so he was very excited by that, and he conferred with his compatriots, and they came up with one of the songs that Cédar had written to teach to us. And so he wrote it out in Creole, and they taught it to Cliff and me that night. And then we had choir the next night, and we with their help, we taught it to the choir. Maria, by the way, our translator, our interpreter translated it, helped me translate it into English. And then we prepared it as the anthem for that Sunday, with our choir singing along for the refrain only. We couldn't learn the whole thing, but we performed it with the folks from Haiti sang the stanzas, and the choir joined in on the refrain, and it was very exciting. Next slide, please. Another quick story I have to tell has to do with the other point of commonality between myself and Louis, is that we were both educators. And I was coming from Ann Wotton School at that point. I was still working as a teacher, and it was that was a very important part of my life. And a French teacher at Ann Wotton knew that I was going to Haiti, and she was very interested in developing a pen pal exchange. And I asked Louis if he was interested in having the student from Bonne Nouvelle write in French to the students at Ann Wotton. We picked French as a language that they could communicate in, because it was not their first language of either group, since they speak Creole in Bigonnais, and English, of course, at Ann Wotton. Next slide, please. At that time, I mean, all the time, mail is not reliable in Haiti. So the only way we could get these letters exchanged at that point was to just when the visitors brought them up. So their students and our students got busy writing letters to each other in late 2012 by hand, and so that they could be exchanged in the January visit of 2013, when the Haitians came up from Bonne Nouvelle. Next slide, please. The thing that we were blown away by in this country, both our students and also us at St. James, was the beautiful handwriting of their students. And I still have these letters, and every one of them is just impeccably written, beautiful handwriting. But what they were impressed by was that our students typed their letters. So our students had access to computers, and their letters, our students' letters were typed. Next slide, please. So eventually within the next couple of years, we helped Bonne Nouvelle acquire computers so that the students could have access to the internet and could also type their letters. And so the next round of letters that were exchanged in the spring of 2014 were sent by email back and forth. And so nobody had to carry them back and forth. And they were typed on the computers. Sadly, the French teacher who started this program at Ann Wotton left the school soon after that, and we actually even eliminated French from the school. But the school continued to be very interested, our school, Ann Wotton, continued to be very interested in maintaining what they called a sister relationship. Next slide, please. So in the fall of 2014, our students did an international literacy fund drive and purchased $1,000 worth of books after consulting with Louis and finding out what kind of books were needed and would work. And so we purchased books to send down to them. And here's a picture of them preparing book covers for all these books so that they would stay in good condition. Next slide, please. And then in 2016, after Hurricane Matthew, all the Minneapolis partners, St. James, of course, leading, but including Anwatan, sent help to Big N to help them recover. We provided cooked school lunches for Bon Nouvelle students because there was a hardship because their means of acquiring food had diminished. And again raised $1,000 to help with this effort. Next slide, please. So the travelers from Big N have visited up here 3 different times, and all 3 times they visited Anwatan School, sharing. They sat down with the principal of Anwatan School and shared ideas. They went to a performance of the school musical on the 2nd trip, and on the 3rd trip they had a chance to meet with the school ambassador program. So it was an enriching experience for Anwatan as well as for the visitors. And that's all that I have today from my perspective, but I think we need to open it up a little bit to questions for the last 5 minutes. We hope to have more time for that, but this is a start.
Yeah, so we'll open it up. This is just a slide showing some photos that emphasize the relationship aspect of our partnership. The Liz and Louis up over to the left, both educators. In the middle more is myself with Joseph, Voltaire, Pierre Louis, both past senior wardens of Bon Nouvelle and St. James. And then down below is Sue Moss and Cedar Nelson greeting each other at the start of the very first visit from our friends in Big N to Minnesota. So you can get a sense of the excitement in that visit. But yeah, we'll open it up for any questions or thoughts or comments. And I do all members of the Haiti committee to respond to any of this.
I do. This is Tom Junala. I do have a question. When you send members of your Haiti committee down to Haiti, where do they stay? What's the accommodations like for members that journey to Haiti?
I'll mention briefly, others can jump in. We actually stay in the village and in our hosts' homes for the most part at this point. So we have made a concerted effort to do that. Another option is to stay in guest houses in larger towns nearby. But we had to formally kind of ask to make sure that they were comfortable and the priest was comfortable and we were all comfortable to do this, but we managed to get that to happen. And it's happened most times. Right after the earthquake, we had to take tents down with us and stay in tents because of course their homes were destroyed. But we do stay in their homes when we are down there.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Any other things that came to mind? You heard a little bit about the history of Haiti, of our partnership, and a bit of our experience in travels and continued relationships.
Louise, real quick, are you guys going to talk about the book that you created next week, or did you? Ruth Ann alluded to it, but
The book that we created.
Ruth Ann created.
Yeah. Pictures.
The short answer is no. We're collapsing 12 years of work into 2 45-minute sessions here. So
now.
Okay.
But in short, we did the second year created a book of called Images of Haiti, which is actually available in the Hennepin County Library. It's also available in the Haiti library that's now sitting at St. Luke's and James, but I don't think any of that's been organized yet.
Okay.
It's in Creole and English stories of 10 Haitian people the second time that I went to Haiti.
I was just thinking of it as a fantastic resource of getting a flavor of the lives that people live.
Since I laid it out and designed it and I have it, I could do it as a PDF that we could send out to everyone.
Oh, yeah.
That was wonderful.
Yeah.
Beth did all the design of it, and I mean, her design just, brought it all together. So yes, Beth, if you can send that as a PDF, we do have, again, the names of people who are here. We can make that a handout. Good idea.
That'd be great. How do you handle translation? Do you have French speakers on your team, or do they have English speakers, or?
Well, it's not French. It has to be
I mean
Haitian.
Creole, I'm sorry, yeah.
No,
So you don't have Creole speakers, yeah.
We do both when we travel there and when we bring our friends here. We need to have translators by our sides at most times. Several of us have tried incrementally to learn bits of the language, but to really have an in-depth conversation, you really need someone by your side. Sometimes we use Google Translate a little bit, get on our laptops and talk back and forth when we don't have someone there to translate. But we have to have translators.
We actually have translators that have been involved in the partnership for a long time and have gotten to be very close with our friends in Haiti and with us up here as well. So
it's a challenge. The first time that Louise and I, in 2009, I guess it was, when we first stayed in homes in the village, we had a very bad translator, and maybe that served a good purpose in a sense, because everybody really struggled, but everybody was struggling mutually. So
yeah,
I want to stop us here because it's now noon. I think this has been a fascinating and really accurate portrayal of what has gone on. Having been down there in 2018, I have one brief story about translation. I was approached by one of the teachers in the school on the Saturday after we arrived in Bigonnet to ask me to say, I just talked to
William,
Yes?
can you share? I meant to ask you to share this next week. Did you mind hanging on to it? I think I know the story you're going to tell.
And right there, I'm inserting an ellipsis.
Oh.
That was for you, David Handy. and I will finish the story next week.
Wonderful, thank you.
I love the story.
It's wonderful. It's wonderful.
that's a great teaser. We're all going to be back next week, William.
I so appreciate this ministry and the joy that it brings to all of us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
This was a wonderful presentation.
Yes.
Yeah.
I knew the facts of it, but there's nothing like the stories to make it
Yeah.
real and connected.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Really
Yeah.
good.
Well, thank you all for joining us.
All right. I guess it's time to say goodbye then.
Okay.
Bye.
To be with us next week, Compline at 7 o'clock.